Good evening and welcome to another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk. Once again, I'm back with my co-host, panel, guest. Actually, this is the second week, so I can't really call them guests. They're just my panel, right? I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Before we do, I have to do the disclaimer. I know it's up there already, but any opinions and expressions that are on this show do not have anything to do with evomm3.com. It's the opinions and expressions of the guest and the host. Once again, welcome to Real Talk, Straight Talk. Second week, title is Racism, Homophobia, Islamophobia, and Discrimination. Questions, where do we go from here? And at this point, I'll have everybody introduce themselves, starting all the way to my far right.
Oh, I am Omar, and I'm happy to be back here with you, Colin, and the team at EVOMM, and happy to be here with Patrice and Stephen. So I am a professor, hospitality and tourism, and last week I was here in the program, and I was just speaking about how racism and issues of diversity and equity affected me in my particular role, living in the U.S., studying in the U.S. and here in Canada. Happy to be back, gentlemen.
And moving over.
My name is Stephen D'Amelio, and like Omar and Patrice, I was on this program last week. I'm the president of Pride London Festival and an award-winning DJ. I also had an opportunity to speak about some of the challenges and unique situations that I've come across during my time and some of the experiences within our community. And I'm very, very interested and happy to be back on this program. I thank Colin and EVOM3 for participating in this because I think these conversations are required. So it's something that I'm excited for and I look forward to.
And next.
My name is Patrice. Thanks a lot for having me back, by the way. My name is Patrice Robinson from here in London, Ontario. I'm a Legal Shield associate, work from home. I here to just really talk about things that have happened to me, how I've been affected by racism. My family's been affected by racism, and many of my colleagues here have been affected.
You know what? I'm just going to pick up on something that Stephen said, right? The meaning of having these shows and the expression. So just before I bring you back, and I know at the start I said we're going to do a little revision. I want everybody to actually talk about, just take a minute and talk about the importance of having these conversations, and then we'll get back to the topic of the day. So once again, I'm going to start with Omar.
Well, we all want change, and we can't get change unless we have conversations. Now, many of you might remember a few weeks ago about that incident that occurred in the Muslim community, and I was watching the news a few weeks ago, and one of the ladies from that community was actually a white lady from that community that actually had a barbecue or a picnic, and she was actually inviting other people from the community to, I think it was a park or so, for people to come and for them to have an open discussion about race and inclusivity. And I felt that was really powerful statement to make under the backdrop of a horrible incident that happened, and that's a good way to start, get people talking, and it's from small things like what that lady did that we can see meaningful change.
Yeah, I 100% have to agree. I also believe, though, from my perspective and the position that I'm in, that it's not just important to have these conversations, but it's important to also be honest about some of these deep issues. I think, unfortunately, across our own community and the LGBT plus community is there's kind of deep issues that we're trying to grapple with now. Racism within our own communities and organizations. And how we have a conversation around that. Obviously, the news around our organization in the last little while has been the police and their involvement in Pride, and how that is represented in the organization and amongst the members. And that, again, involves deeper conversations. But for me, it's always been having to have those conversations, having those people at that table. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that I think, you know, it is great that people are expressing themselves on Facebook and on social media. It is not enough. Performative is fantastic, but we need more. So being engaged in these conversations, standing up for yourself and others, and being at that table is what's required. So again, this is a good opportunity for this.
And Patrice?
For me, I think it's really important to have these conversations, you know, being, you know, like for me, somebody who's born and raised here in London, Ontario. I don't even know if you're born and raised here and stuff, but born and raised here and stuff by really traditional Jamaican parents and stuff like that. For me, it was a big cultural difference. And I never really understood, like when I was younger, you know, the importance to have these conversations. You know, my dad talking about racism and my dad talking about this and topics like this, and I never really understood it, right? Because, you know, usually when I was going to school, I was the only black kid in the school. So it's really important to have these conversations and stuff, because racism is real, and people need to, no matter what color you are, you really have to have these conversations with each other and open up a dialect and stuff, so people have a perspective and a respect for where other people are coming from.
And for me, I came to London, I think it's 98, right? Came from Toronto. The first few years in London, I started DJing, and I started DJing all over the place, right? I shouldn't even say the first few years. The first many years in London, I was a DJ. As I progressed as a DJ, I crossed over more into the top 40 market. For me, as a DJ that came from Toronto, playing a lot more reggae and dancehall and stuff, it was rewarding in the sense that I think at the time when I came in, clubs here, if you played 4 reggae songs in a row, that was it. So I was able to play more and do more. Because I crossed over, I think, you know, I didn't look at some of the things that were prevalent, right? Crossing over, like I said, gave me tunnel vision. It's kind of like, yeah, it's going on, but it's not happening with me. So, you know, and I'm climbing the charts, and I'm so focused on trying to find my way and to establish my brand as a DJ and all that stuff, that I wasn't focusing on this. It took me years after I stopped DJing. My first actual realization came from my daughter, and she had said something to me about just black males and going to school, and that was from an educational standpoint, where she said, you know what, there's a higher percentage of black males that are not going to post-secondary education or even trade school after they leave high school than there is in Toronto, right? And then she talked about certain things that she was experiencing, right? And so that was my first, and that's kind of started me on the journey. I think a couple of years after that, I started to volunteer with a tutoring session with a tutoring project with Liz Acano from the Congress of Black Women. I always got to give a shout out to that group because they've been so instrumental over the years. And we're going to talk about that real brief because, you know, your mom is very instrumental with the Congress of Black Women. So I always have to support the Congress of Black Women and give them that shout out. As it continued to progress, you know, it made me truly understand how privileged I was at the time not to. But when I stopped DJing and stopped being in there, I started to look at certain things and seeing certain things. So here we are, and it's, you know, 2020, 2021, and this project has started. And people, and I'm going to talk to everybody that's watching, and you know what? I want you to tell your friends, I want you to tell your family, these conversations are so important from so many standpoints. One, these are conversations, like you said, that they happen on Facebook. Before Facebook, in the Caribbean community, they would happen sometimes at the dinner table, sometimes when you're playing dominoes and all that stuff. But it never happens in a larger perspective. We in the black community, we kind of, especially when we're in London and certain smaller towns, I talked about this last week and I'll talk about it again, we kind of, you know, we look around to see who's watching before we kind of engage in this stuff. We're kind of hesitant, right? But in 2021, there's a beautiful door that was opened. It might have been opened because of tragedy, but sometimes out of bad things, good things can happen. Yeah. In 2020, you know, George Floyd and that whole situation came down. Then I'm going to say the Black Lives Matter movement in London started their demonstrations, right? I know you have some. I know my friend Stephen has some, you know, interesting thoughts on it. But one of the things it did do, it helped raise awareness. Whether or not we agree with how they go about and all that, that's neither here nor there. But it did raise awareness. So I always going to give shout out to the Black Lives Matter movement for what they started. Now, with what they started, it's up to all of us to embrace. And if we have different ideas on how to do things, that's okay. There is no one way that we should go about and deal with all of this. There are many ways, right? But the important thing is that we need to talk, and then we need not only to talk, but to come up with solutions, with plans, and more importantly, after we come up with all of this, implement them. Because talking is good, coming up with a plan is good, but there's nothing comes of it if we don't actually put that plan in play. So with that being said, once again, people, I want you to be involved, and being involved can be as simple as telling your friends, hey, we have this show. Or you know what? If you don't agree with this show and you think you can do better, not even better, if you have another point of view, feel free to express your point of view. Here at EVOMN3, we encourage all points of view. We're not here to say that our show is the best show or our ideas are the best ideas. We are here to embrace everybody's ideas as long as it's within an acceptable, and when I say acceptable medium, we're not asking for violence. We're not asking for you to put anybody down. Do not disrespect anybody in the process. Bring your ideas out. Let's go. So with that being said, there was an overview that I believe all of us took away from last week. And once again, I'm going to start with Omar, and I'll let him go through what you grasped from last week and where you think we're headed.
Well, last week's conversation put into perspective that the incident that occurred with the Muslim family wasn't new, because our own brother Patrick right here lost his brother in a similar instance, and back then, you know, there wasn't a lot of attention being paid to it. And I think with this incident occurring, kind of put things into perspective that, you know, the more things change, in essence, the more they remain the same. So that was my takeaway from that conversation last week. It was also interesting hearing Stephen within his own experiences within the Pride community about some of the challenges and issues that, you know, people from various demographic within his particular community face. So I left that conversation with my eyes and ears wide open and very aware of what's going on.
And
first of all, thank you. This is being involved in something like this is eye-opening in its first place. Is the fact that we're having these conversations, the fact that, as Colin, as you mentioned, you know, that there's the idea that these conversations kind of got kickstarted by George Floyd. In my mind, it kind of started with Trayvon Martin, even before that. But
I'm going to say I'm not saying that there weren't conversations before. What I'm saying is that at George Floyd brought such a consciousness right around the world that it kickstarted a lot of conversations. So.
And the movement, as you mentioned, Black Lives Matter movement, didn't just start up here in London, but also across the world. So, what last week brought to my attention was that, as I mentioned, there's, I've always known that there's deeper conversations that are required within the Black community. What I didn't, to be honest, realize is that individuals who may come from, predominantly Black countries, have a completely different experience coming into this country.
Yep.
And again, like we talked about privilege, and the idea that, you might be growing up from North America, from Toronto, maybe you have, like myself, I have a white, parent. So there's a complexion difference, there's a background and educational difference. There's a lot of differences that it was a little bit more eye-opening for me to hear. And I think, as Omar had mentioned, the fact that we had not just the discovery of 215, which unfortunately has been climbing since then,
Yes.
of Indigenous children, which of course brought attention to the mistreatment of Indigenous individuals across our country. But it also, in that same week and a half, also happened to have a hate crime happen. And that brought out, as Omar had just said, the more things seem to change, the more they stay the same. And so I'm extremely happy to see that we have people being engaged, and I'm glad that we continue to have these conversations and try to get people more engaged. But what stood out to me was that this is a time and place where change is happening. And I hate to say it, but you're either on board or you're missing the train. So that was what I took out of this, was that this is the start of this, or kind of the precipice of where we're at, and we need to continue moving forward.
And people, I'm going to give Patrice a few more minutes to talk. And the reason is I want to drive home the fact that there was a tragedy that took place almost 20 years ago, and the dynamics of which have never, ever been truly addressed. So once again, I'm going to let him go over it, because I believe that for our community, we need to understand it. We need to talk about it more, because you know what? It shouldn't be just the Muslim community that we talk about, and there's no disrespect intended to the Muslim community. They have their spokespeople, and they have the ability and the platform to keep it relevant, which it should, because tragedies such as what happened to Pat's brother, what happened in the Muslim community, needs to be continuously addressed until something is done. So once again, I'm going to turn it over to Patrice, welcoming him back, and I know the emotions that go with this, but I want you to go back over your story one more time, and then we'll move on.
Well, back then, what happened to my brother, it was 21 years ago, actually. Just last week, 21 years ago, I buried my family buried my little brother. So for me back then, hate crime was not a really big word. Racism was. London, Ontario, and I'll say it straight, is very, very white bread. It really is. Our system is very whitewashed. And back then there was no talk about hate crimes and, even a lot of skinheads or anything like that, right? So after what happened to my brother, it got thrown out of court. They said there was insufficient evidence and things like that. And then that's after that fact is when they actually started putting cameras downtown and putting cameras all over the place. Now, I'm not calling my brother a martyr, but he was kind of the catalyst to that being done. And now you go in every corner and stuff, there's a camera, right? For situations like that. And had there been cameras down there and more people with cell phones with the cameras out and things like that, things might have went the other way. My family or my brother would have got justice, right? But unfortunately, it wasn't that. I am happy that, now, and especially in London, Ontario, that, those cameras are around and people are putting their cell phones up and catching things. And I hopefully, that this Muslim family that was, their lives were just taken pointlessly, just over racism and bigotry. I do hope they get the justice that my brother never received, or that my family never received. I really pray that for them. But it wasn't really taught. What happened to my brother, it was on the news and it was in the papers and stuff for a period of time, a short period of time, but it doesn't take away, all the calls that my family received, and, close to 4,500 people at his funeral. I'd never seen a funeral like that, and there was people that were coming in from all over the place, right? So we, my family and myself, we really appreciate the support, and I still appreciate the support that, my family's received because of that, and after that, continuing to today. So it's a long journey. If this happens to anybody, no matter who they are, I do hope they get the counseling that I've been lucky enough to receive over the last 20 years. and the help and the support that they need. And that Muslim family does have a lot of support. But what I'm more concerned about is the 9-year-old little boy. I'd like to meet up with him some point, give him a hug, and tell him I totally firsthand understand what you're going through. I've been thinking about him every day since then, as well as my brother.
Once again, I always got to give you thanks for being here and telling your story. On top of that, his family went through so much, and they still found the capacity to turn it into something good.
Yeah.
And I've told the story last week, but I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your mom and her work with the Congress of Black Women. She's done something beautiful in the community, and I want you to, it needs to be said. People need to hear it. People need to understand that, yes, your family went through. They didn't just get mad and say, oh, well, that's the end of it. A lot of good things came out of it. You're here. You've been very vocal on social media, and I count that as something good, because long before I started this, you were doing this. Right? And so when the panel was being put together, Michelle, or my partner in EVO MM3, she said, you know what, Patrice. And I'm like, wait a minute, yes, Patrice, perfect person to have. I don't think this panel would have been, or this talk on racism and discrimination and hate should happen without you being here. So
right.
I really want to thank you for being here. Now I'm going to let you once again talk about your mom and her work.
All right. As far as the Congress of Black Women, I do not personally have a lot to do with it. I do. Mrs. Ocano is my sister-in-law's mother.
Right. So you
right. So it is close to me, and maybe I should be following what they're doing more often. I do know they do a lot of good things. They do give away an award, the award for human equality. It's a scholarship that's given away every year to students that are picked out of the city they don't have to have necessarily the best marks or be top of the class. They just have to demonstrate that they're a positive role model in the community. And we give that away every year, and my father's actually the one who's put money into that.
Yes.
And that just continues to grow in perpetuity every year. And it's just given away to students, I think, since don't quote me on this, but I think there's been 19 scholarships given away through that scholarship. And my mother speaks at that every year. She's actually the one who's always invited. I'm never invited to it. Or I miss the emails. So it's Congress of Black Women. I'm a black man, but it really has a lot to do with me.
I'm fortunate. I've been the DJ for the Congress for a few years.
Let me know how it goes next time.
So it's about, I think about 5. And that's where I encountered his mom. Yeah. And every year she's there. And every year she is, and like you said, I didn't know it was coming from your father, and I should, but I looked at it as a family thing.
That'll work. It comes from all of us in a way.
Yeah.
I came up with the name. My father has the money to do it. My mother goes there to be a spokesperson. So in a way, we're all part of it. It's just in what capacity are we part of it, right?
Yeah.
So.
And so, on being able to address one of the things that we talked about is solutions, and Pat and his family, Robinson family, they've come up with their solution, right? And unfortunately, it came out of something bad. But people, we don't need to wait for something worse to happen to come up with solutions, right? And it's unfortunate when it happens like that. But there's a reality here in 2021 that things that need to be addressed, right? So we get to the part where we're going to talk about solutions and where you think we should go and all the things that you think we should be doing individually and as a community. So if there's anything that anybody else wants to add. Yes, please.
If I may, Patrice, I mean, you have been in London maybe longer than most of us. Would all the with your incident and with the incident that occurred recently with the Muslim family, and there have been other instances with, I think it was a gentleman that was running for council or parliament, Bennett, and he spoke about some experiences when he was on the campaign trail. Would you say that London is a racist city? Because there has been a narrative out there that's saying, would you conclude with that? How do you see that?
Well, I've been looking at this a lot, this type of stuff for a lot of years and stuff. You know, when you have a dad that's 98 years old, he's been through some stuff, he's seen some stuff. He's definitely going to put that into his children, right? I see North America as a racist continent. I really do. You know, as you were saying last week, you know, you came from Jamaica, you know, not far away from where my dad was born, and in 1923. Can you believe that? And you never really experienced racism until you got here, right? My sister-in-law, Evie, Mr. Candle's daughter, my sister-in-law, you know, I've spoken to her briefly on stuff like this. She never really seen racism until she came here, right? So, and a lot of people of color that come here all of a sudden are thrown in are into this, and then they start seeing the racism. So there's got to be a common denominator, right? There's got to be a common denominator, because in their own countries and stuff, they're not seeing it. They come here and they start seeing it.
Well, from my experience, and mind you, listeners, I did live in the U.S. for about 7 or 8 years and have been living in Canada permanently since 2004. I don't really think, you know, whether it was a GTA where I live or London, I don't really see it as a racist city, or I don't see Canada as a racist country. I think the experiment that we have here in Canada is probably better than the experience in most other countries. If you look into Europe, places like Germany, places like France, even in the UK, they have a tremendous amount of issues, a lot more so than we do. And I think, as I said last week, the city still has bigots. The city still has xenophobes, and the complexion of the city is changing. People must be prepared to accept that, because Canada itself markets itself internationally as a viable destination for people to come and live, work, and study. So with that being said, you know, things are only we're gonna see more changes in the complexity of people that come here. And I think the federal government, they have started an initiative, from what I saw from the Ministry of Culture, of Multiculturalism, and their guiding principles are saying that they're going to demonstrate federal leadership, they're going to empower communities, and they want to build awareness and changing attitudes. And I think at the community level, with what that lady did with after the incident with the Muslim family, conversations like this, it can definitely help to build awareness and change attitudes.
Oh man, and you know what? I'm gonna jump on the fact, and let's talk a little bit about racism in Canada. I believe to a certain extent, and it's, you know what, I read in I think it was MSN and News, the Canadian aspect, because MSN has got USNCA, and it said today, and this is today, 1/3 of Canadians believe there's racism.
Yes.
Right, and that's there. Now, racism in Canada is different from racism in the States, but to me, it's worse. And let me explain why I say it's worse. In the U.S., my brother's in New York. I've been there. I've been to other parts. I've been to Florida. I've been around, right? I find it's open. If somebody doesn't like you, they tell you, right? You find a greater percentage of people will tell you what they are and who they are and what they represent. In Canada, we've been very conservative, very, very conservative. In fact, you have such a hard time finding out who actually doesn't like you. It takes events. Now, with Trump being in power for the last few years, you found that there actually is a small version of the Proud Boys here and all the, you know, the alt-right groups, they're there. They just decided at that time they're actually going to show themselves, right? Canada, they don't talk about it. They don't show it. It's subtle. You live in and I've been in London for quite a while, right? And like I said, I didn't look for it. I didn't look for it, and I was too busy concentrating on other things when I was a DJ. But take me out of the DJ aspect, and you see it all over the place. There is. I believe there's a conversation you told me about a professor, right? That said he believes he's a token, right? And that happens in the Canadian society, and as black people in Canada, we kind of bought into it too because they don't talk about it, so we don't talk about it. So we kind of treat it like it isn't there, right? I always say if you ask the average Canadian, was there slavery, they're going to say no. But you can't abolish something that wasn't there. And Canada had to abolish slavery, right? In London, Ontario, in the I believe it's about 1827 or 1837, there was two black gentlemen that escaped slavery, came here, and one of them started an apothecary, and apothecary, for those that don't know, is a pharmacy. They also started a fruit store. Now, it was good for about 4 years or so, or 5 years, and then the things started to change, and in the end, they lost it, right? Because things started to present itself, and the racist attitudes and the discriminating attitudes came about, right? Believe it or not, in the 1800s, right, at that time, 1830 to about 1840, 1845, black people were better off to a certain degree than what happened when they came into the 1900s. In 1927, there was the Canadian version of the NAACP that started here. In fact, it started at Aeolian Hall. They had their first meeting, right? And at that time, it's because they were reduced to being porters. They were reduced to that kind of labor. Shoe shine was the shoe shine was one of the biggest. Between the shoe shine and the porters is one of the biggest. Canada, okay, from the 1920s to about 1960s, did not want to have black males emigrating from other countries, right? They would take black women who would come in as nannies and that kind of thing, but they had a policy in place that stopped black males from coming through. It opened up more in 1960. There's numbers that show you from 61 to 69. I think they started doing, I think, 1,000 families a week. Then 70 to 79, it went up to, I think, almost 10,000. And then there was a great influx in 1980. So, and these are things that people don't know. But is there racism in Canada? Is there racism in London, Ontario? Most definitely. But people don't want to talk about it. It's hard for you to talk about it when the next day you have to work with somebody that's white, right?
I will also say, though, that, and I'm going to be blunt about this, there's racism in our own community.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's...
Yeah, we don't like light-skinned people.
Well, this is my point. And this is, I think this is where, to Omar's point, if we want to have a conversation about, is there racism in London? Well, yes, London is, as we talked about, a majority Caucasian, and there's always going to be an element of our society that has bigoted views.
Yes.
But the deeper conversation, in my opinion, is we already know, we can see these types of situations. The racism that has started to startle me, frustrate me, and I'm not really here for it anymore, is within our own community.
It's in our own community.
I've been called out as Pride President, racist terms from black people within our own community. There's no reason for that. There's no excuse for that. And that to me is education. That to me is again, this idea that saying something online protects you because you don't have to, really stand up for what you're saying. But there's a solution to this. As we were talking about, what are the solutions that we need? And as Omar was pointing out, and as Patrice has pointed out earlier, it starts with having those conversations, but it also starts with educating people and telling them where those next steps are. I admire, and I'm going to kind of mark myself here, I'm very political, and I admire political groups that are engaged, are educated, and are willing to take those chances. The Tea Party in the United States, not a very educated group of protesters. They have their own views on certain things, which I'm sure a lot of us don't necessarily agree with. But at the end of the day, they decided, after protesting, to make political action happen. They actually went and ran for seats. They actually ran for power. That's what we need. That's how you create change. I'm in the position I'm in not because I want to be, president, but because in order to get this change, you need to be not only be representing your community, but actually speaking to those issues and being involved and actually making those changes happen. So, for example, my position, it's a 2-year term. Last year, I was on the bylaw committee, which handles all the rules and regulations of the organization. It's highly important that you're involved in those types of aspects. So, for example, working for a school or working for an organization, getting involved in the behind the scenes. And ensuring that there's people at the top level, educators, trainers that represent you and people in your community, and speaking out. So when you are tokenized, speaking out and advising, I'm not a token. I'm here on my own volition. I've been called a token black person in this position.
Yes.
And I call it out to everybody in the community. I'm not. I'm here because I want to be here and I want these changes. But it really starts, to me, with, and those are some of those solutions, it really starts with owning your own power, knowing what you as an individual can do, and then harnessing that and building upon that. Patrice works for legal, or is and I apologize, I don't mean to out that, but it works for an organization that offers legal services. Those are steps. Those are small steps, but they're helpful steps. They empower you, they empower other individuals. You don't have to be on a community organization like myself. You just have to be engaged, active, and educated. And I think that's our starting point as to where we need to move forward.
To elaborate on what you're saying there about, being called, racial terms being used against you. I actually had that myself. A lot of people, most of the black community doesn't know, I was a singer. And, I like rock and roll music. I like heavy metal music, and I sung in, a couple bands and jammed with a lot of people doing rock and roll and metal. And, it's funny. Everybody in the black community was like, why are you singing that white music? And I was like, who are you talking to? They're like, I'm talking to you. Why are you singing that all white music? I'm like, worked out pretty good for Little Richard. Worked out pretty good for Jimi Hendrix and stuff. What are you talking about? White music? What does that even mean?
Yes.
What does that mean?
And I'm going to talk about,
That doesn't make no sense to me.
Yeah,
it drove me crazy. But also,
yes,
from the white community, because predominantly when you play in these rock and roll bars and stuff like that, they are predominantly Caucasian. And even people I jammed with and stuff is like, I can't believe, for a black guy, you sing rock and roll really good. I'm like, what does that mean?
We started rock and roll.
Are you crazy?
We started.
And I want to mention, the DJ scene is another one of those unique scenes where, and I'm, we kind of came up in the scene together a little bit. Back in the day, aging myself a little bit here, back in the day, if someone like myself or you walked into a nightclub, there's 2 questions we got asked. this isn't a hip hop bar, right?
Oh,
and I don't know if that's the case because I haven't DJ'd in a bar in some time now. But and there was a bar. I won't name it, but there was a bar which is a very well established bar. A lot of great owners, but they particularly kind of pigeonholed individuals who were darker complexion and would say to them, kind of like you're saying, play hip hop music. And so those are the things, even within our own community, those are those little, and the new generation uses microaggression as a new term.
Yeah.
Those are those microaggressions that even to ourselves, we don't really think, well, that's offensive, until we run into a situation where we're like, well, that's actually not what I'm here for.
It's one of the bigger reasons I left the whole music scene and jamming and going to bars and stuff like that. I just got tired of it.
I want to touch on a couple of things that were mentioned. As a DJ, I'm going to touch on the DJ aspect of it. it wasn't until I finished my days, and I'm gonna call out some names here. When I finished my days at Club Phoenix, right? The next bar that I went to, and this really stopped my DJ career. I think my second night, they looked at me and they were like, one, you can't get on the mic. Two, there's stuff that you can't play. Needless to say, for me, there was no week 3 because I never went back. In our community, an individual such as Pat, singing and playing in a rock band, automatically he's gonna get stigmatized, right? Because ostracized, right? All kind of eyes and sides and sides and all this stuff, right? And there's two things here. In our community, especially maybe it's a little bit better now, but back then, you're whitewashed if you're in a rock and roll band, right?
I got a lot of that.
You speak eloquently. That's another one.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's coming from an immigrant perspective, right?
Yeah.
You speak eloquently. If you speak eloquently, you're which part of the, Meanwhile, the white guys and the white DJs, I grew up with white DJs and came in with white DJs that were like, oh, you're just a hip hop DJ. That drove me, right? Even more. If you didn't play house music, right? And now the flip side of that is the black community are like, oh, you play house music, you can't be black. Now, let's think about this. Rock and roll, like you said, one of the founding fathers is Little Richard.
Little Richard, sorry, yeah.
One of the greatest guitarists of all times is Jimi Hendrix. Now I'm going to give you what I consider probably in my top 5 of rock guitarists has got to be Prince.
Yep.
Because if you break down Prince's music, behind everything there is a guitar solo. It's just that his music had so much layers that it wasn't as standout as it was in a rock setting. A rock setting, that's really where it stands up because that's the theme. That's what carries everything.
But I will mention, so 2 quick things I'll mention with regards to music. So Lil Nas X is a good example of where we are now as far as the new generation goes, watching a gay black rapper do country music with Billy Ray Cyrus.
Yes.
So that's a massive step. At the same time, though, there's also this movement which happened way back in 1980, 1970s of lightening your skin as a musician. Lil' Kim has gone through it. A lot of musicians have gone through it.
It's crazy.
Where it is looked at, the industry itself pushes you to lighten your skin because it's more beautiful.
Even Jamaica. So many of our artists, bleach.
Yeah.
Right. I'm even going to talk about a country such as the Dominicans. In the Dominican, right, and a lot of Latin countries, right, and we got to understand the history behind that because Spain had established a lot of those countries. So the lighter you are, the better you're supposed to be. It's gotten so bad that sometimes, and I'm speaking from experience, if you tell a Dominican they're black, some of them will say, no, they're Dominican.
Yeah.
They don't relate to the black experience of that. You're black. No, I'm Dominican.
Yeah.
Well, if I could jump in there, Colin, that is consistent with what we've seen happening over time.
Yes.
The Americans, the African Americans, I should say, they will correct me. They have a history of saying they're not African American, they're not black, they're American, or they're not African American, they're something like that. So the point I kind of want to stress in this segment is that we're not going to get away from racism. We're not going to get away from stereotypes. They're just a part of the compositions of who we are as human beings.
Yes.
Okay, we can better cope and deal with it through education, having a greater awareness. And I think here in London, what really needs to happen, and I think I saw it in the news recently, Harold Usher.
Yes.
He was saying to the news the other day that London needs to hire more minorities.
Yes.
And this is a 5-time councillor people that is saying that London needs to actively seek out and hire more minorities. And We understand it's a small city and you might have issues finding people. But again, there are a lot of people here within the school system that are coming through, that are coming out, that they could look into. And I think those are some places that we can start by making changes. My experience with racism is more institutionalized. You see what I'm saying?
And I want to make a quick plug, because Harold Usher, if you're listening, right, and I hope, and if somebody that knows Harold Usher,
I actually do.
Please, we want him on his show, right? Because not only has he been a counselor, a 5-time counselor,
yes,
he's been instrumental in a lot of things, whether you agree or disagree.
Yes.
He's somebody that needs to be on the show because I know he has a lot of insight.
He created the first racial policy for London in 2000.
He also, I actually had a conversation. I actually had a conversation with him.
What does that tell you?
Yes.
I actually had a conversation with him back in 2007 or so.
People, that's the sound of somebody trying to chime in on the conversation. So, Stephen, can you hold on for a minute?
Can.
We're going to get back to you, and I'm going to bring it. Welcome to Real Talk, Straight Talk. Who am I speaking with? Who are we speaking with?
Pastor Thomas.
Good evening, Pastor Thomas. We ended the show last week with your thoughts. We kind of started with your thoughts, and tell us your thoughts this week.
Well, I really just wanted to say that these conversations that I've been hearing from all four of you are relevant needed, and it's something that has to continue to happen. It can't just be on one time. I think if we can have this once every 6 months, it's very important for people to see the side of our Black male counterparts. It's very important. A lot of times we hear about how the women feel, what the women are saying, or the young people, but we don't hear from the men. And I think it's vitally important for these conversations to continue to happen. And I want to thank all of you for coming out and for sharing and sharing real talk, because it's not easy to do that. But once again, it is so important. So I thank you. I know the viewers thank you. And I really hope that Colin asks you guys to come back up again sooner than later. So thank you all.
Thank you. She's putting the pressure on you.
Oh, so much pressure. Well, one of the things I'm going to answer Pastor Thomas, I'm going to tell you, we're probably actually going to end up being the home of the podcast, because I've already talked to the gentlemen and on the panel. They know they're coming back. There might be even a few that actually end up with their own podcast. EVOMM3 is going to be the home of the podcast, because that's one of the things that we want to do. I know you're going to be on your on this podcast in a couple weeks, talking about the spiritual aspect and where does the church stand. Next week on the institutional aspect, we have, I believe, George McCauley and from the Catholic School Board, and Leroy Hibbert from LUSO. And then the final one in the series will feature all ladies, the ladies talk. And I know Tiffy had expressed a desire to be on. You know what? I think if I could even get a political side to this, and you know what, with Stephen talking to Harold Usher, I'm interested in actually bringing him in. I'm going to actually try to reach out to anybody on City Council right now. You know, names like Mo and
Ariel's another one.
Yeah. Who?
Ariel. She's running for.
And Ariel as well. I'm going to try to see if we can get them and talk about it from a political perspective, right?
I am interested, as Omar was mentioning. One of the things that I've kind of encountered talking with the police, talking with the Thames Valley District School Board, talking with banks that support our organization. One of the things that our board had no problem doing was calling some of these organizations out and asking them, how many individuals of color, how many Indigenous are you hiring? And one of the things that we keep getting back, and I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on this, is we're trying.
Yes.
We would, the police, we would like more. We do not have a talent pool large enough to pull from, and we've been trying to get that. And that's both within the education system, within corporate Canada. From your perspective, especially being, your background, how do you kind of resolve that issue? Is it just that we need more awareness that these jobs are looking, or is there barriers that you maybe came across yourself?
That's an amazing question, Brother Stephen. So I'll give you an example for a colleague of mine that worked as a director for HR for Fairmont, which is a large Canadian company. Now they realized that Indigenous people were underrepresented in their organization, and they were actively trying to find them, but they couldn't find them.
Right.
Okay, and they actually had to go on a reserve into one of the schools and found students that were interested in culinary because they wanted to create opportunities for them and offer a scholarship and actually follow the student right through until they graduated and offered them a job.
Right.
Now, Usher is saying that, a good way to start in London is by making some of these opportunities available for black people. And for those of you, not black people, for minorities, we're not looking for any handouts, okay? These jobs that Usher is talking about, we can get them on merit. We don't want anything else rather than getting these jobs on merit. The talent pool is out there, however, it's very tiny. And what I am saying, Brother Steve, is that they can make a lot more effort to partner with the schools. They can make a lot more effort to partner with community organizations. And by doing that, it can help them to identify people. And if they're not qualified to where they want them to be, then they can provide them the training that they need in order to get the job done.
Now I'm going to take it on a micro level. Yes, we need it out there, that these opportunities to be placed out there, but there's even a different element that I want to go on with this. When you walk around London, you don't see enough people like you, right? Which is one of those reasons why podcasts and shows of this nature there to showcase who's in our community. If you are a young person going in school, right, and you're thinking of what you want to do after, it's important for you to see who's out there. And if you don't see who's out there, you don't have that aspiration right off the bat. We have a lot in our communities where we're heavy with the single parent families, and so the need to see people like ourselves, the need to showcase our people like ourselves, right? I think that's on a micro level, on the lowest level, that's first and foremost, right? There is the talent pool that's out there that we need organizations, companies to actively recruit us. But it goes back to what my daughter said, where there's a large amount of black males that are trying to be anything else other than
Basketball player, rap star.
Right.
Yeah.
Not even basketball, sports and music.
Yeah, sports.
Well,
because that's who they're seeing.
Well, and that's an important point. For any black kid or any minority kid out there who's listening, I have some points for you, okay? I want you to research your history. You might have trouble, like me, when I was growing up as a kid, figuring out who I was in terms of accepting myself for the color of my skin, okay? And easily I found that it was through education and Rastafari, where I actually found myself and grew into myself. Then the next thing you want to do, you want to talk to people. And I'm not talking that little person hanging out on the corners doing things that's not going to help you somewhere. You want to see Patrice, Stephen, Colin, anybody that looks like they want to get somewhere, and you want to have a conversation with those particular persons. Turn off sometimes those music channel that you're watching with people dancing and gyrating. We already have enough of that. What I want you to do is to watch some documentaries, look out for successful black people that have done things in the past, and that's what I want you to model yourself on. Look for positive role models. Now, even if you don't see anyone doing what you want to do, don't let that deter you. Be an innovator. Kick the damn door down and force people to recognize who you are. But I want to urge you, make sure that you're exhibiting or displaying proper professional etiquette, proper professional guideline. My grandma used to say, manners takes you anywhere. And I think those are some simple things, but a lot of things that are lacking in our community and are preventing our kids from moving ahead because they don't even listen to their parents.
I also
A lot of parents don't know. That's another big problem.
Yeah.
And we got about 3 minutes, and once again, as we start to really get into the conversation, we're running up against time.
I just wanted to
Yeah,
very
go
quickly. I absolutely agree. I think that for anybody that's listening at any age, but especially youth, that is incredibly important information. And as you were just saying, and one thing that I kind of want to really hammer home, if there isn't somebody out there that you see that is doing what you want to do, as Omar had mentioned, kick that door down. All of this takes commitment. And there are going to be things that come into your way. There's going to be people that try to tear you down. It's kicking that door down, and it's showing those people that you are able to do that. That's incredibly important information. I just wanted to quickly touch on that.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes. And you know what? We're in 2021, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this generation that's here is a generation of entitled. So whereas I agree with you about kicking the doors down, I think it's up to us to actually deliver it to them, because the attitudes and the determination that you have and that you have and that you have and even myself is not necessarily the prevalent attitude that's out there right now, because a lot of the generations that are coming up now have come up with the thought that, oh, we should get it or we should have it. So if we don't, as the older generation, if we don't actually make that effort and say, yes, you know what, in our time we were taught to do this and to think for ourselves and to do this, if we hold that thought in our mind, we're not going to be helping them the way we should.
I know we're almost there, but when I just moved to London and I was watching CTV, you know who I saw in the news first?
Who?
Mo.
Yes.
You know who I saw afterwards? Ariella. Is that her right
Yes.
name?
Yeah.
And that's all I needed to see.
And
because
that's you.
I am saying right there's somebody who looks like
you.
me, and I'm so amazingly proud of them.
I
so
know, but
that
you're
kind
looking-
of
you're
gave
looking.
me solace.
And I have to say
You
that
see what I'm saying? It
And
gave
I know,
me
and
solace.
I think it's because of who you are. And I'm dealing with, like I said, you know what? My kids, you can see the ages, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you from a different perspective. That's who you are. That's who I am, right? First of all, this stuff needs to be in their face. Like, when I see in their face, in their face. And yes, Mo and Ariel, they're doing a fantastic
Amazing job.
Yes, we're gonna salute them for the job.
But they need-
it's,
they need role models in their age
help.
group.
They need help, and once again, we have to realize that yes, our generation and what we learned in our generation is different from how they came up. So some of our attitudes are not. It doesn't cross over.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
And being a DJ and hanging out with younger DJs, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand the disconnect, and I agree with what you're saying. And but I'm seeing a disconnect, and not all of them are going to go out. I think a greater percentage of our age group would have been more go-getters in that aspect than there is right now. And because of that, I think it's up to us to actually go and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we got to go beat down the doors and to these kids and literally grab them up and, figuratively grab them up and say, hey, here we are. Right? Where it wasn't like that with us, because our parents would have been like, hey, blah, 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 blah. And it's not like that anymore.
Their values are different than ours, just
Yeah.
like
Very
ours were
much.
different from our parents.
Very
Yeah.
much.
They are, but what I'm still saying that where there's a will, there's
There's
a
a
way.
way.
No, I agree with you.
No, I agree with you, and I'm speaking directly to the people who are out there.
Yes.
Watch TV, and when you watch TV, sometimes turn off those violence and sexuality and all that crap. Watch people that are, talking on the news, newsmakers. The news has a lot of powerful things in it that you can learn from. And I'm saying it's very simple. You could go into your school and you could find someone. If that person is not there, they can access someone for you.
Yes.
And that's what I want to see the youths do more of, because I'm tired of the excuses, quite frankly.
Yes.
We know the problems that are plaguing our community, and they're not unique only to us. Other communities are experiencing those problems.
Right.
And I'm challenging parents to do something positive. If you don't have it in you, make it a commitment to make sure the generation that comes after you, you leave them in a better place than where your parents left you.
Oh man, I'm gonna thank everybody. It's been, you know what? I almost called him Chris.
Oh,
I only have to say that. Oh man, I'm gonna thank Omar and Stephen and Patrice. People, this panel will be back. Keep in touch. We, keep watching for when we're getting back. Also, check us out on YouTube, because this show will be replayed, first of all, on Thursday night at 7 o'clock. After that, all episodes then go to YouTube. So it'll be in YouTube a few days after that. So by Saturday, it'll be on YouTube. Go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, like us. Also, fill us in. Let us know what you think of what we're doing here, right? Easy. Once again, send a comment on YouTube, or send a comment at evomm3.com, or even, you know what, if you feel like really doing more, info at evomm3.com. Let us know. We appreciate all your comments. We really do. I want to thank everybody. I've got to thank a few people also. First of all, I've got to thank the Wien Community Center. That's one of our sponsors. They allow us, I say it every week, they allow us the space to operate. Big shout out to, I got a big shout out to the Congress of Black Women. They're my group. Yes. To all the other groups and individuals, right, that are out there that are doing the things that need to be done. There's the, Black London Network. There is LUSO that deals with the immigrants. There is our fill me in.
Pride London Festival.
Pride London Festival.
There's another organization, Black Gay Men's Network, that we work with.
Yes. To all the groups and all the people, I don't want to leave. I might not call everybody, but I don't want to leave everybody out. To all the groups that are doing things in our community, I'm going to salute you. I'm going to, put my hands out to all of you, right? That's what it's all about. See you next week. We're back with, I think, with an racism, discrimination, homophobia, Islamophobia from an institutional standpoint, from a systematic standpoint. We have George McCauley on the show next week. We have Leroy Hibbert. We have another guest. You'll see who they are. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on YouTube. And I want to thank my guys that are doing the tech. And we'll see you next week. And this is what I like to say at the end. This is what we call a blackout.